Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's session 2 of our conference today, Embracing a Movement for Change. And it's my pleasure to introduce this session. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. I can see people are joining and coming online as we've started now. So thanks for coming along on the journey. I'm really looking forward to this session. It's an absolute pleasure to chair it. Let me start with some introductions though. I'm Jackie Glass. I'm the Principal Investigator for the Transforming Construction Network Plus. I'm going to do some housekeeping and introduction comments now, as one of the team leading this particular investment from the industrial strategy in the UK. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Network Plus shortly, but do you know what? I think we better do some housekeeping because not everybody was on the first part of our day, the keynote from Paul Chan. Paul Chan will be joining us a bit later. So housekeeping, we are recording these sessions so that people can watch them again at another time, those who couldn't be with us today. We'll share those with you. And we're using 2 functions in Zoom today. We're actually using both the Q&A function, so you can ask questions at any point during the session. But if you'd just like to make a remark or an observation or perhaps reinforce something that one of our panelists has said, you can use the chat function as well. And also in the chat function, we'll be putting in some links or resources that you might like to make use of as well. Now, with both of those, actually, you've got 2 options. If you'd like to remain anonymous when you're making your comment or question, you can do so. Or if you'd like to say who you are or where you're from, you can do that too. It's entirely up to you. But we're recording it. We're also actually live tweeting. So we've already started the day on Twitter using the hashtag TCM+. And during these discussion and panel sessions, we'll have Network Plus team members live tweeting as well to try and keep us abreast of the conversation and enable others who weren't able to join to actually contribute as well. So I think that's pretty much all of our housekeeping items done. But I just suppose I think I ought to give a little introduction. There will be some people on the call who aren't familiar with the Network Plus and who we are and what we're doing. So the Network Plus is an investment, as I said, it's been funded by the Industrial Strategy under the Transforming Construction Challenge in the UK. And our role within that is to bring academics, industry and policymakers together to really attend to some of the challenges within our industry. So, of course, that's going to span digital engineering, manufacturing, energy, construction, supply chain. This is a big piece to go at, but it's important that we bring thinking together, we bring innovation together. Let's bring the research and the practitioners and the policymakers together. So you're participating in one of our events, and I hope very much that you enjoy it. If you've not joined one of our events or programs before, you can see the link on screen, which will take you straight through to our website. And what we tend to do is keep all of our resources there and recordings, slides, etc. But what you'll also find in there is things like our digest. And the one behind me, Platform Thinking for Construction, one of our publications, so you can download that free as a PDF. The Network Plus is run by UCL. We have partners with us from Imperial College London, Warwick Manufacturing Group and the University of Sussex as well. We're funded from UKRI, UK Research and Innovation. So let's move on then to get into our session. I'm absolutely delighted. This is a stellar lineup we have in this session, I have to say. I'm delighted that we have all of these folks along with us. I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and there's slides from time to time for you to have a look at as well. What's important here, though, is that we get into some very clear discussion, some provocative discussion about the kind of industry we want. Okay, so let's ask those tough questions. Let's try and envision what this industry might look like. And so I'm going to be asking each presenter to speak for about 10 minutes. We'll hear from all of them first, and then we will get into a panel discussion. At that point, Paul Chan from TU Delft will be back with us again, and he'll be able to pick up comments and join into the discussion. So I'm looking forward to welcoming him back again. as I said before, for those of you just joined us, I see people are still joining the call. Please use the Q&A and the chat function as we go through, and I'll be picking out some of those in our discussion session later on. So at any point, if you want to make a contribution, please do so. You can also see what other people have said. So if you want to chime in other comments as well, let's get that conversation going, shall we? Brilliant. So I think what we ought to do then is get into the meat of this particular session. So I'm absolutely delighted, first of all, to introduce to you Mark Reynolds, the Chief Executive of Mace. Many of you will know Paul, I beg your pardon, Mark, from his work, not just within Mace, but also within the Construction Leadership Council. So, Mark, I wonder if we might move over to you at this point. And I think you're going to have some interesting messages to share with the audience today. Mark.
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning, everyone. I hope you're all keeping safe and healthy. And it's great to be able to join this conference to share with you my views on what kind of construction industry we really want. And I was pleased to hear Professor Chan's earlier reference to the Rethinking Construction, because it was Sir John Egan himself who had a fundamental impact on my thinking, along with many others who were fortunate to work with him at BAA in the mid-1990s. Before I start to talk about what kind of construction industry we want, I want to reflect on the last 6 months. As a member of the Construction Leadership Council's COVID-19 task force, along with Peter Caplehorn, who's following me, it became very clear that the sector works as an ecosystem. And without recognition of the importance and the reliance on each part of the sector, and by this I mean the repair and maintenance and improvement, housing, construction, the clients, consultants, contractors, manufacturers, material suppliers, and education providers, we will forever have a sub-optimized industry. I personally loathe the phrase fragmented. One thing I've learned on the CLC task force is that we need to understand each other's challenges at a macro level, particularly to avoid the unintended consequences. Now, unlike previous recessions, we all know this one is very different, as we're all affected. And whilst the impact has been severe on the construction sector, it's been less impacted than others. And we really do have government support who continues to back us. For example, we now have an effective Construction Leadership Council, which has a £170 million sector deal behind us. This wasn't in place in 1998 when the Rethinking Construction and the Movement for Innovation was launched. And it provides us with a much better support network than ever before, and much greater access to government who value our industry. So what are the challenges we need to overcome to create an industry that we really want? The CLC's roadmap to recover can be boiled down into 5 key areas to focus our improvements. The first being decarbonise and consider the biodiversity impact on our environment. If we do not take this seriously, then the impact of COVID-19 will seem like a minor blip. We must start immediately to remove carbon from our materials and minimise the impact on our environment, particularly in the way that we design, construct, operate our buildings and infrastructure. There are many great examples of what can be achieved, but we need to focus on those items that can make the biggest impacts, such as concrete by using low cement content, removing plant that emits HFCs. We need to set ambitious targets, train and develop our people, and implement carbon reduction plans on all our projects. This can be done immediately. It just needs leadership and a desire to make it happen. Secondly, we need to improve the safety and quality of our buildings. Our sector cannot afford another Grenfell Tower. The human impact is unacceptable. Without recognition that we need to change and address these issues, then we will lose our license to operate. And this won't be through legislation. Quite simply, companies who do not address these issues will not get insured. And without insurance, they will not be able to trade or operate. My next point is we must improve the quality of employment. We must make our sector more appealing to a more diverse community that embraces diversity and ethnicity and allows the progression of the brightest people to take our industry forward in the future. We must also embrace traditional skills because these will be required for a long time into the future. And we need to make sure they're in the right quantities and in the right parts of the country. My fourth point is we need to create a collaborative and outcome-based business models. This will enable companies to develop solutions that Professor Chan described earlier and allow integrated supply chains to share information and collaborate much better. It is important that the contract risks are placed with those who are best to manage them and allow companies to earn reasonable profits to invest in research and development and, importantly, their people. And my final point is we need to develop an efficient and effective ways of working that embraces digital and modern methods of construction. The good news is we are making encouraging progress. The use of digital tools is becoming commonplace. We have all seen how Teams and Zooms can help us communicate more efficiently, as we are today, and share our ideas quicker, more effectively to help us run our businesses. I'm often asked by my colleagues for funding to invest in digital tools, to create digital libraries, standard databases, to develop dashboard reporting, along with digital design tools that enable real-time on-site productivity improvement. These are important and will help us significantly improve in the future, but it's the data that will be transformational for us. As you can see, as soon as we can count on what we design, measure the carbon, understand the cost better, our productivity performance and the life cycle performance, that will become our game changer. New careers in our sector will be needed, such as data analysts, who can help us identify what we should focus upon and show us how we can use the information to make the improvements. Back in 1997, Sir John Egan and I had a conversation about how Jaguar built bumpers for an XJ6 car. Now, I'm not sure how many of you can remember that car or even what a bumper is today, but his remarks were, it was unbuildable. How many times do we still hear that in our industry? The use of platform solutions and sub-assemblies are the way forward. We need designers to create facilities using design configurators that use design facilities based on common platforms and standard sub-assemblies. Of course, they will be upgraded and improved, and we all want that. But there's no need to go back to first principles every time. Only by improving productivity will we see costs come down and salaries improve ahead of inflation. If we do this, we will become a construction powerhouse that will drive exports. So what type of construction industry do we want? Well, for me, that's very clear. We must decarbonise and protect our environment, and we must start immediately. We want safe homes, safe buildings, and safe infrastructure that is built to last. And we must improve the quality of employment by creating an industry that people aspire to have lasting careers. We need smarter business models which are collaborative and based on outcomes, not the lowest cost. And finally, we must develop an efficient and effective ways of working that embraces digital, modern methods of construction that significantly improves productivity, reduces costs, and allows companies to invest in research and development, and importantly, developing their people. So thank you for listening to me, and good luck with helping us transform our great industry. I'll now hand you back to Jackie. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for that impassioned but a very holistic plea for the vision that you're looking for. I think you've picked up on a lot of things that others will perhaps emphasise as well, but I suspect some will be also challenged, which is exactly where we want to be today. So thank you very much indeed for that. I think you've made a number of observations around decarbonisation, skills, but also platforms. And I know that we're going to cover that a couple of times today as well. So thank you very much indeed, Mark. Let's move on to our next speaker then. Peter Caplehorn. Peter is joining us from the Construction Products Association today. I've known Peter for some time, since he was working at Scott Brownrigg as a technical lead. So Peter brings us into the products, materials and construction space from his perspective. But I know, Peter, you're also going to be reflecting on quality and safety, I think, within what you're speaking to us about today. So Peter Caplehorn, welcome, and over to you for 10 minutes, please.
Jackie, good morning, and good morning, everyone. And Mark, thank you for that stirring start to the proceedings. Could I have the first slide, please? I'm not seeing my slide at the moment, which is probably the first technical hitch of the morning. No.
It's up on my screen, Peter. We have a title slide for you.
Yeah, that's a shame, because I'm not picking that up, which is disappointing. But oh, wait a minute, I can see it now, I think. Okay, good start. I'll keep going and see what happens anyway. So everybody, thank you. And what I wanted to start with was just to identify what is the products sector composed of. And certainly, you know, as Mark alluded to, we've got a large industry. We're talking about, just in the product sector alone, it's worth 60 billion, 24,000 companies, 337,000 employees. And the CPA does cover around 85% of that. So I think that is a demonstration of just how important looking at products really is. Can I have the next slide, please? And it's not showing for me, so that's really handy. I'm not sure what I can do about this, Jackie, I'm sorry.
So Peter, there's a slight lag in the slide being viewable.
Right.
And I think it's the lag is, for those of you viewing on the app, it's going to show a little slower, but anybody on the viewing Zoom through the internet is going to receive it slightly quicker. So they are changing, but a little slow, Peter. Sorry about this.
It's okay. So there should be a slide of a lady with a very organised desk in front of you at the moment, I hope. What I wanted to do there is just say, okay, so the title of this is What Construction Industry Do We Really Want? And I think the point for me is recent events have shown us that we need to question everything. We need to pick up on the issues that have befallen us in terms of the Grenfell disaster, in terms of Carillion, in terms of the skills gap. Productivity continues to be questioned. And as Mark mentioned, the image of the industry. Now we have tried to tackle this on many occasions, but unfortunately, I think those things have kind of fallen by the wayside. But if we just focus for a little bit on some of the key points that have affected our industry, perhaps we can identify the momentum and the kind of things that we need to get into. So I need to move on to the next slide now. And again, it's not moving for me, Jackie, so I apologise to everybody if I'm moving out of sync. But the slide you should be seeing is of Lakenhall House 2009. Now, I want to go back to that because for me, this was a seminal moment. The Lakenhall House fire was in a building that did achieve some design awards when it was built. And unfortunately, that fire unfolded from a very small beginning and led to loss of life. And yet it was avoidable. It was caused by some poor maintenance, some poor addressing of the emergency of the time, and 6 coroner's letters were issued, but nothing changed. And that to me is a great disappointment. So I can move on to the next slide, please. And the next slide should be showing you a building called Summerland, which was built in the Isle of Man. In 1973 it opened, and I remember it well because I'd just started my first regular job. Now this was a total disaster. There were many people killed, the cladding caught fire, people got trapped in the building, and it was a key moment for the industry. Regulations did change, building regulations changed, and so that to me was a change that was really important to note. If I move on to the next slide, please. And you should be seeing now a slide which takes us to 2016. And we all know the effects of the Grenfell disaster, but here I just wanted to focus on also the problems that were occurring in Scottish schools. We narrowly missed a significant disaster there, and it boiled down to one particular problem in the construction sequencing, but over a lot of different contracts. So it was an endemic problem that we were looking at in that situation. If I can move on to the next slide, please. My next slide is entitled Red Tape. So I hope everybody can see that. And for me, those events came to a bit of a crunch actually just before we had the Grenfell disaster. Many of you will remember that we had this process in the UK called the Red Tape Challenge. And for me, it was about the disrespect of regulations, the disrespect of quality. There was a whole series of endemic problems that were crystallized in that program. And I well remember having discussions with MPs about the fact that we don't actually need building regs in the UK, which seems ridiculous now. And then, of course, we had Grenfell. So I think that the responses there clearly were out of kilter with what we really needed to get to as an industry. So if I can just move on to the next slide now. And the next slide shows the front cover of Dame Judith's report, Building a Safer Future. And I just wanted to focus on that because for me, we needed to respond absolutely to the problems of Grenfell. We needed to get a grip on all these issues that have been floating around. And Mark alluded to several of the key things that we needed to focus on. And I would suggest that the disasters that we've had recently and the subsequent review by government and the Hackett Report, this is different. This is a different moment in time. And we need now to focus on that because just around the corner, we have the challenge of Brexit, which is considerable. Mark mentioned digitalization, and I've been very keen on ensuring that we take advantage of that for many years. But it is not yet business as usual. And digitalization will actually achieve a lot of the things that we absolutely need, measuring carbon, making sure that performance is as we designed. So, but above all, in that, innovation is crucial. We must get a grip on making sure that we develop those things which we can see tantalizingly at the edges of the industry and take them into the mainstream fundamentally. Can I have the next slide, please? The next slide should be showing a building safety program logo. I think when we come down to it, the essence of the industry we need is one we can all be proud of. We need one that delivers buildings that perform as intended, most of all. I really get fed up with the fact that we produce lots and lots of assets, lots and lots of buildings. On a world stage, some of those are brilliant, but the average building does not perform, and it does not perform from nearly every aspect. Many buildings do not comply with regulations. They do not deliver the carbon footprint that we've intended. And for the occupants, above all, they're a pretty poor experience. We need to have an industry that values standards and respects everyone. We need to have an industry that has sector productivity that matches other industries. We need to have an image that attracts the very best that we can get. And we need to have skills that are supported and respected across the sector. We also need to have appropriate ethical and professional behaviour. I really think that is so important. And above all, we need to have a fully competent industry that regards competence as business as usual. Totally essential. If I can have the next slide, please. Next slide should show the picture of the front cover of the Raising the Bar competency report. And what I just wanted to reference here was that this is about ensuring that the core drivers of the industry focus on a 21st century approach. And for me, that's about making sure that we have regulations, and they're on their way, we know that must be respected, not fudged. We must have health and safety and well-being that's always considered. totally crucial, that is. We must have quality and value before cost and speed. And we must have risk management, not risk avoidance. And for me, it's about ensuring that supply chain connections are understood and respected. And the next slide, please. And so just to sum up, because I think I'm coming up to the end of my time, Jackie, I would like to say, well, where are we now? Now, Mark mentioned the work that we've both been involved with on the CLC virus task group. And really, this is another seminal moment for the industry. I think the collaboration that we have been able to achieve there has been phenomenal. We've reacted to the virus situation, I believe, very well, and helped the industry on its way through to normal working. We've got on its way a new approach to competence that will affect everybody. We've got a new regulatory landscape. The bill has just been published for consultation, and that has got a lot of implications in this drive to a better industry. We need to have joined up products and construction that we use and focus on, and they again are in the wings and waiting to be rolled out. We need to consign value engineering and cheapest and fastest to history as far as I'm concerned. And above all, we need to focus on value, customers, and respect to get this industry to the position that we really want. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. That was an excellent overview, and you expanded a little bit there in some of the things that Mark had kicked off with our session. I particularly enjoyed the conversation around disrespect, the conversation around endemic problems, and your closing slide there, bringing it all very much together. You mentioned, of course, ethical behaviour, professionalism and competence, and actually that's our first mention of ethics today specifically, which is a wonderful segue, I think, Peter, to our next speaker. Amanda Long is with us today, everybody. Amanda, delighted to welcome you as Chief Exec of the CCS, the Considerate Constructors Scheme, and a banner that many of us will have seen on sites across the country. So I'm really looking forward to, Amanda, to hearing what you've got to share with us today. So Amanda, we're with you now for 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this event this morning. Thank you to you, Jackie, and to Mark and Peter for getting us going. It's evident by the level of engagement how important these discussions are for the future of the industry. And I very much look forward to discussing what the central components of what the future of construction, of the construction industry, not just needs to look like, but really must look like going forward. And I'd like to start off just by referring back to what I think is a crucial point, which Professor Chan made in his intervention. And this is around the reference to ethical values-based choices and the move. And as I say, I think it's a real need to put this front and center for the construction industry. My background is in driving ethical values, having formerly worked in setting up social responsibility for the fast-moving consumer goods company Unilever, and latterly championing the consumer and public voice for global consumer protection. And as Professor Chan referenced, this is really going to be about stepping outside of our knowledge zone and our comfort zone. And that's exactly what my challenge has been to the industry since taking up the role of Chief Executive of the Considerate Constructor Scheme just a year ago, almost to the day. Over the past year, I've been really excited by what I've seen about this industry. It's a remarkable industry, a creative problem-solving industry that's hands-on. People really want to get the job done, and there is a definite will to bring knowledge together. And that's all exciting and fantastic. But it's also clear to me that this industry doesn't always sit comfortably with being accountable and demonstrating competence. And that's something that both of the previous speakers have mentioned in different ways, particularly around competence. And it is the challenge for now, and it's going to be the challenge over the next few years. At the center of being accountable is responsibility and a responsible culture. And to achieve the challenges which immediately face the industry, positive culture change and behaviour change are going to be required. The Considerate Constructor Scheme has about a 20-year pedigree of driving behaviour change through on-the-ground monitoring of registered construction activity. And it's done well in achieving what many would deem basic standard changes, but are actually ethical changes to behaviours for everyone, whether it be for those that work on the site, for local communities impacted by construction activity, or the environment. And as basic standards across Considerate Constructors has improved, so the bar in what's good and very good has also raised over the years. So we've seen progress in many areas which affect the quality of employment or the experience of construction for the community and care for the environment. And that's all great. But much, much more needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly. Time is not on the side of the industry. And it is this culture of responsibility, transparency and accountability which is so important to the success of the construction industry now and in the future. I believe that a successful future industry is based on two simple outcomes: achieving higher standards across the industry through culture and behaviour change across a broader set of key issues, putting carbon and building safety absolutely central to those issues. And I also believe the second key outcome is about creating and sustaining trust so that anyone, the general public, a resident, a passerby, or any colleague working on any element of a construction project, from design right the way through the resident going into the building, can have the confidence and the assurance that the construction industry is considerate and that it cares and that it's trustworthy. To create higher standards in considerate construction and create trust across our communities and the general public as a whole, we need to look at, as I've mentioned, our culture and our behaviours. And I don't think it's a nice to have, I think it's a must have. Safety and responsibility in the industry are two of the major issues that the construction industry is facing, and both of them are brought to the very fore by, most recently, the devastating Grenfell Tower tragedy. But as Peter quite rightly led us through, this has been in the offing for a long time. There is an essential requirement for any user of any physical building or structure to know that when they use that building, it's safe. It really is that simple. An important part of the scheme's role in relation to safety and responsibility across the industry is taking place with the Building a Safer Future Charter, which the CCS was appointed to develop and manage earlier this year. And I just want to talk about the Charter for a second. The Building a Safer Future Charter was originally conceived by a number of leaders across the construction industry in the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The Charter is all about raising standards and creating trust by promoting urgent and positive culture change in the safety of the built environment. It's about putting people's safety first in how we plan for, design, build, maintain, and look after the safety of the buildings we live, work, and play in, and protect those that use them. And the Charter has an essential role to play in helping to facilitate culture change and drive development. And how we'll do it is through creating learnings around a collaborative community of those committed to putting safety first. Peter quite rightly raised, collaboration is at a high point in the industry, and what we've got to do is keep that going and keep working together. Plus, for the Charter to have real meaning, it requires accountability and transparency, which is crucial to creating trust. And this will be achieved through independent benchmarking and verification. So not monitoring, which is what we have in CCS, it really will be a level up from that. And we'll also be providing a channel for the public to raise any concerns they have about building safety. And in order to demonstrate that the Charter has substance and is underpinned by benchmarking, it will be necessary to have a really effective approach to independent verification. We're looking at other industries, the chemical industry's responsible care approach, for example, others, nuclear, oil and gas, but we also have very strongly taken on board the sort of point that, again, Professor Chan highlighted during his presentation, that any approach shouldn't be a cut and paste job, taking from another industry and simply applying it here. It needs to be bespoke to our industry and respectful of the needs of our industry. And to do that, to create something with real meaning and substance, we've been working, the Charter has been working throughout all of summer and continues to work with a group of expertise drawn from the industry and also outside to create that benchmarking and verification process. But also key to this is about listening and engaging with residents and community groups, so that we're really able to help the industry achieve the culture change that's required. as a resident of a building told me at a residents' meeting just shortly before lockdown, she sort of sat there and squared up to me at the table and said, Amanda, you and your scheme, you can send me all the newsletters you like, and that's great, and we really appreciate it. But what I really want to know is whether the building me and my family are living in is safe, and who do I go to if I've got a problem? And so that's what has to be at the front and centre of our thinking. And I believe that the Building a Safer Future Charter is going to be one way that we will be able to help drive that, so that it becomes a socially responsible industry, not just driven by the building safety regulations, but by our community around the Charter and by the industry itself seeking to lead on these issues. And so that sort of links to, again, Professor Chan's comment about working in social partnership with every stakeholder. And that goes way above and beyond the supply chain, which is very, very important, but it actually needs to be at the heart of the construction industry. We ultimately build for society. And if society isn't at the heart of our industry, then we need to think seriously about our approach. So if we have a real social partnership with communities, with residents, with other building users, which is genuine and it's committed, it's committed to really a two-way regular engagement, and then we can underpin it with the sort of benchmarking and verification process that we're bringing into the Charter, then that should help us achieve a better, more trusted industry for everyone. Something else that the Charter is really seeking to do is to try to create a safe space where leaders in the industry can work together to help achieve this culture change. And we've been very, very pleased to see more and more industry leaders becoming registered signatories of the Building a Safer Future Charter. After all, we're all part of this society, and we all deserve to know that our buildings and other structures are safe, and that there's been real rigour behind them, and that the industry cares. So thank you for listening, and I look very much forward to our discussions today.
Amanda, thank you very much indeed for that. I think it's really useful for people to have the update on the Building Safety Future Charter. And thank you for bringing in the local general public to your commentary here, which is an audience that is not always front and centre to the conversation, is it? So thank you very much for that. Some of the words we've been hearing this morning, we're starting to talk a lot about value, what we mean by value. Quality is coming in. And you know what? We've got a lot of contested and debated words ahead of us. So thank you, Amanda. And talking about contestation and debate and discussion, it's time for an academic speaker to join at this point. So I'm delighted to hand over now to Professor Stuart Green from the University of Reading. Stuart, I can let you know that Paul Chan has been with us through the whole session, and I'm sure has been listening avidly. So Stuart, you're our last speaker on the panel, and then we'll be drawing in Paul and to have a wider conversation. So Stuart, would you share with us your views, please, on the future industry you'd like to see?
Good morning, everybody. Can we have the first slide, please? Thank you. So I've tweaked the little title just a little bit, look, by putting not. What kind of construction industry do we not want? And I'm going to quite deliberately here take a long-term view, and I'm going to focus on some of the events that have shaped the kinds of problems that we deal with today. It's part of the accepted narrative of transforming construction that the industry is slow to change. Too often we conceptualise the construction sector as if it were a static entity which is resistant to new ideas. I offer a different sort of diagnosis, and I focus on the long-term dynamics of change. Next slide, please. And I'm going to start off here back in 1973. I think it's the date at which Peter Caplehorn started work in the sector, if memory serves me. And I'm going to start off by talking about the Poulson Scandal. Not talked about anymore in polite company, it seems. And yet this has had a significant impact on the construction industry that we still deal with today. The Poulson Scandal exposed extensive web of corruption across local authorities, also involving several MPs. Much of it was around high-rise public housing developments, which at the time were directly incentivised by central government. Systems building techniques were very popular at the time. Industrialised construction, inspired not least by Harold Wilson's speech of 1963, alluding to the white heat of technology. The web of corruption extended far and wide, bringing down the Home Secretary of the time, Reginald Maldron, and the Royal Commission of Standards in Public Life emerged as a direct response to the Poulson Scandal. So if we talk about ethics, let's use the Poulson Scandal as our essential point of reference. And the much lamented insistence on lowest cost tendering and all of its negative implications dates back to the Poulson Scandal and the web of corruption that prevailed at the time. Then we moved on. Next slide, please. The other pivotal event that I will mobilise in my narrative is the National Building Strike of 1972. Some may recognise Ricky Tomlinson there in the left-hand slide. This was a period when industrial relations, back please, this was a period, we've gone forward too quickly, go back a slide, thank you. This was a period when industrial relations were at an absolute low point. And we had all sorts of problems with the Barbican development, illustrated in the top, and the National Building Strike of 1972 brought the construction sector to an end, brought it to a close. It left a lasting legacy of bitterness amongst the main contractors and indeed amongst the developers that still has consequences for the industry that we live with today. Next slide, please. The other thing that happened very significantly towards the end of the 1970s was the end of the planned economy, the end of the pretense that the state could somehow manage the economy. Ronan Point is illustrated there. 1968 is symbolic of a loss of confidence in industrialised methods of construction at the time. And the troubled times of the 1970s, the oil crises, the industrial unrest, brought an end to the age of the planned economy, leading to a significant rollback of the state with fundamental implications for the construction sector. The iconic moment was in the early 1980s, where the representative Gang of Eight, the Gang of Eight, if you like, was the predecessor of the CLC. The Gang of Eight went to visit Mrs. Thatcher in number 10 Downing Street to lobby for a greater demand of demand management. And the rest, as they say, is history. And of course, the little diagram at the bottom illustrates the peak of public housing in the back end of the 1960s, which has been in terminal decline ever since. Next slide, please. And so the stability of the previous era gives way to change. And what we saw was the extensive privatisation of the client base for the construction industry. The utility companies, British Rail, BAA, British Telecom, British Rail, etc., were all privatised. Perhaps of no small significance was the privatisation of the Property Services Agency, which of course was a arm's length body derived from the previous Ministry of Public Buildings and Works. The retreat of government as a provider of mass housing takes away significant certainty of demand from those in the construction sector involved in the provision of housing. And we saw the demise of the direct labour organisations. In 1975, the biggest employer of construction operatives in Western Europe was Glasgow City Council. Those days are gone. And of course, we saw the introduction of compulsory competitive tendering, not least because of perceived public sector inefficiencies. Next slide, please. And the response of the sector to these influences was to adopt the strategic model of structural flexibility. It led to an increased reliance on subcontracting. We've seen the emergence of the hollowed out firm, where the typical general contractor, main contractor, comprises only a tight-knit group of management personnel. They talk about supply chain management. Supply chain management is the only thing left they've got to do. If they didn't do supply chain management, they wouldn't have anything else to do. But significantly, we saw this huge growth in self-employment in the sector over this period, from around 30% in the mid-1970s to over 50% in the mid-1990s, where more or less it remains. Self-employment, of course, has always had a bona fide role in the sector, but I struggle to believe that it's sensible to run an industry where around 50% of the industry's workforce are self-employed. What kind of a railway are we trying to run? These sorts of changes brought around a decimation of the apprentice system. And of course, this structural change was legitimised by the proliferation of so-called management procurement methods, and the legitimising storylines became lean construction, supply chain management, partnering, collaborative working. Next slide, please. And several people have talked about the Egan Report. In my reading, the Egan Report was a clear signal from the new Labour government that they weren't going back to outdated old Labour policies of demand management. They were putting their faith and trust in the innovative capacity, in the management expertise of private enterprise. That was the message of rethinking construction. And of course, there was lots of citations of cunningly clever management techniques. We then go into a period of what I describe as the cloying consensus, where for a sustained period of time, the main interest of the industry is in the implementation of the Egan targets. We've got this kind of bizarre situation where we're putting our faith in enterprise, but at the same time we're measuring the performance against some sort of Stalinist set of performance indicators. But what's interesting here, how the dominant narrative was innovation. Nobody talked about regulation. Regulation became a dirty word. Peter Caplehorn has already talked about the challenge on red tape that extended over this period. Next slide, please. And of course, then we come into the years of Cameron and Nick Clegg and the new age of austerity, trying to recover from what was then the biggest recession and financial crisis since the 1930s. And the emphasis of the construction debate focused very much on core messages: cost and carbon. Many of us saw the marvellous presentations by Paul Morell of the time. Cost and carbon. BIM started to appear, started to be talked about. It didn't matter what your problem was, the answer was always BIM. And then slowly but surely, of course, the storyline of industrialised construction started to appear, modern methods of construction, and we're seemingly taking the terminology of the debate from a series of McKinsey consultancy reports, which seems a bit strange for me. The one report, of course, that did break the consensus, as I've previously alluded to, was Rita Donaghy's report, One Death is Too Many, that came out in 2009. But of course, it came out at that period that coincided with the change of government and very quickly got kicked into the long grass. Nobody talks about it since. Next slide, please.
couple of minutes, please, Stuart.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you, Jackie. And here I'm just touching again on the same points of reference that Peter touched upon. The first couple of quotes are from Building a Safer Future. Lack of clarity on roles and regulations. This period of extensive restructuring in the construction sector has led to a lack of clarity on roles and regulations. Inadequate regulatory oversight and enforcement tools is the legacy that we're left to deal with. A lack of legal accountability exacerbated by industry fragmentation, which is not a natural condition, it's something that's been incentivized, and multiple layers of subcontracting. The more recent Raising the Bar report makes exactly the same point. Contractors are increasingly divorced from the point of execution on site, sometimes by up to 4 or 5 layers of contracts, often ending in the use of transient self-employed labour. Mark Reynolds talks about the quality of employment. That the problems are painted out very clearly in these 2 reports. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide, and it's all pictures. Is this the industry we really want? I've used the same picture here that Peter used about Edinburgh schools. And for those who want an insight into the way the industry works, I would really recommend the Cole report, the inquiry into that. And the other pictures, I think, speak for themselves. Jackie, thank you very much.
Stuart, thank you very much for your time on this and your thoughtful review of some of these really important events, scandals in some cases, that have actually influenced why we are where we are today and have been for some time, some would argue. So thank you, Stuart. Thank you to all of our panelists. And it's time for us now to move into some Q&A and discussion. So thank you to all of you who have been contributing through the platform. We've had various questions being placed and we've had some comments offered as well. So what I'd like to do now, before we start opening up some of those questions and comments, and of course our panelists can view those and see them as I draw them out, but I'd like to welcome back Paul Chan. Paul has been with us for this session. Paul, I wondered if you wanted to put your camera on for a moment and your microphone, because what I'd like to do, Paul, if it's okay with you, is kick off this particular phase of our session this morning by posing 1 or 2 thoughts back to you, and of course inviting you to comment on the session as well. So Paul, welcome back. Now, Paul, when we played your pre-recorded keynote earlier, we had a very interesting reflection come in, and it was around the idea of partnerships. So I thought we might start there, actually. And the comment was, why do we keep using the word partnerships when they're not? A true partnership has parties committing resources and sharing risk according to their share in the partnership. The word partnership in construction has been manipulated to make it look like a cosy, non-conflict environment. Collaboration is a far better term and should reflect where we should be going in construction. So let's talk about perhaps a little bit about collaboration and partnerships, Paul, and also hear maybe some of your thoughts about the panel speaking first thing just in this session. Paul.
So thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you very much, Stuart, because I think what Stuart mentioned in his presentation is the legitimizing of certain discourses. And I noticed that one of those discourses is collaboration. So for those of you who know me, I have spent 22 years in the UK before I moved to the Netherlands in 2019. And moving to the Netherlands actually opens my eyes to different ways of doing stuff, right? And this idea of collaboration seems to be very natural to the Dutch, and for good reason. If they didn't collaborate, they would be underwater. So they have had 1,000 years of actually trying to sort out their landscape. I think that this idea of collaboration has become legitimized because we have hollowed out the firms, as Stuart has mentioned. We've also fragmented. We've started to specialize, and with that, we started to have very complex supply chains. I think a couple of years ago there was this scandal on selling horse meat in supermarkets, and what that actually triggered was also a reflection on the supply chains and traceability within the construction sector. And it's really quite interesting to find out that actually companies don't know what goes into their products, who is involved. I think, Jackie, you've done some work on modern slavery also, and I think it's quite ridiculous that we talk about collaboration, but we actually don't sort out very basic stuff like that, I guess. So I think that's my take on collaboration. I think the Dutch have a very genuine way of looking at collaboration because they really have to solve a problem together. And they call it, actually, that's the name for it. It's called the polder model, where everybody gets together and talk about stuff until they agree. So I think that's very interesting.
Thanks, Paul. That's a really good start. So we've got various questions and comments coming along through the platform, and an opportunity now to take some of those themes actually and start having a think about them. I have to say one of the themes that's come up, which I'm particularly moved by, as some of our speakers are also, is the gig economy, precarity of employment, loss of skills, arguably, and also poor management. Now, Mark, I wonder if I might bring you in on this. Skills is something very close to your heart. I know you're working within the CLC around apprenticeships, etc. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing happening on the ground. What do we need to do about precarity, problems of self-employment and the gig economy? What should we be doing about this? Mark, are you with us there?
Yeah, let's just start with some of the challenges, particularly around recruitment for the industry. So I think what we've got to do, and this is what we've tried to do, is make sure that people who aspire to come into the industry have a career path. And one of the things, ashamedly, I'd say 3 years ago, I hadn't realised that how many people decide to come in the construction industry, but actually don't get converted into jobs at the end. And if we look at through further education, one of the things that we don't do particularly well as a joined up industry is ensure those people who do join educational, further education particularly, is get jobs at the end of it. And we lose 70% of the people who join through further education who don't get construction jobs at the end of it. And that for me is something that we've struggled to tackle as the CLC, and struggled to tackle as the skills working group that I was responsible and still involved with. But it's only by, and this is what we've found over the last 6 months, is actually if we start joining this up and working together and start to tackle that, we've got to create some form of pipeline where people who join the industry get jobs at the end of it. Now, the biggest challenge we've got at the moment is obviously people aren't taking on employment, aren't recruiting people at the moment. So we've established the talent retention scheme that hopefully keeps people in the industry and shares people in the industry. And that also promotes apprentices as well. Now, we will get through this and the volumes will come back. You can see that each month the volumes are coming back into the industry. We do have to hold our nerve for the next 6 months. And I just talk from my own perspective. Our output, construction output, is at 90% levels it was pre-COVID. So we are back to where we are. There will be some winners and losers. So aviation is a challenge. Transport is going to be a challenge. But there are going to be new sectors and services. And what we've got to do is make sure that we take this long-term view Stuart outlined. So if we can create the right platforms to get people attracted into industry, we can then create the systems to keep people in the industry and move people around, then that will help. I mean, there is no silver bullet to this. It's been a challenge forever. I noticed on the chat about, and make reference to SMEs. You know, there are some brilliant SMEs out there, and this is about choices for the leadership of those SMEs. You know, I work with, you know, small SMEs that, you know, 7 or 8 people, who just have small organisations who really commit a lot, and there's others who just go to work and do their job. And it's those people who want to make a difference who really we've got to get behind and support. We've got to get behind by bringing them in with funding, giving them the support to grow and develop their business, because they're taking people on in the right way. So there are lots of government support out there, and I think actually this is where we need to be stronger with a greater tie-up with local government and central government to make sure that we can tap into those funding streams to support those companies who really want to change.
Thanks, Mark. As you can see, the chat, you know, there's a few comments coming up around subcontractors, and I was just thinking actually, Amanda, you know, you visit the sites in your role in CCS, Considerate Constructor scheme. You're seeing all sorts of site practices, I'm sure. And one of the things that's coming up for me through the chat and the Q&A there is the issue of the culture on site. Okay, culture we can see manifested, and again we have another wonderful contested term of culture, but the culture on site. People talking in the chat, etc., about, well, how do you deal with managers who would just say, well, we've always done it this way? Amanda, how does CCS go in and challenge those sorts of people to represent, for example, the views of the public that you're trying to get across?
Well, thanks, Jackie. CCS has done very well to do that, to challenge. It's interesting when you look across the base of organisations that work with CCS, and it's a voluntary scheme, so they they don't have to do it, but often, not always, but often it is a leadership decision to sign up with CCS, and so the site manager would be stuck with it. But there are often cases where actually the site manager really wants to do it and it works really well for them. How do we help site managers move their thinking forward when they're not embracing it? At the moment, how the scheme does it is really on a continuous improvement basis, on the basis of going on the site. A lot of the monitors who work with us are individuals who are qualified, chartered surveyors who come sort of late on in their career and have decided they want to do something else as well. So they tend to be, or engineers, those that have had experience of construction. They tend to be able to get on the site. They tend to be able to sit down with the manager and talk through, having looked around the site. Well, these are the areas that you're not doing well, and this is what we think you ought to be doing, or this is what we think you need to be thinking about, and I'm going to come back in a few weeks. So it very much is about trying to create a conversation with a site manager who's reluctant, about trying to get that site manager to see the value of that and see what's gone on other sites. In terms of this collaboration piece, there is a lot of collaboration in CCS. A lot of the companies that are involved very willingly share their good practices. And so the Considerate Constructors Best Practice Hub is heavily used for one site to work out how better to do something. Of course, there's an element of competition. There's an element of there's an incentive there, a bit of encouragement for engagement within companies. Of course, internally, they also use the scheme to set up a little bit of competition as a bit of a nudge towards helping people change their behaviour. I think that the scheme needs challenging, and please be aware that I am challenging the scheme internally to make sure we are raising our standards higher and that our monitors are asking for more, and so making sure that it is not too easy necessarily for individuals, but at the same time, if you want to raise standards, you've got to get people you've got to get people into the conversation, and you've got to try and get your arms around them, and you've got to try and engage them, and give them information that they need, and then help them see the value that there is to it, and then go back and push for more. Command and control, you know, too much stick isn't going to be the way that you'll get the behaviours you want. You've got to incentivize it, and what is positive and interesting about this conversation is there is lots of ability, there is lots of knowledge, it is there, so it is about bringing that together and then working out how do you share it, how do you get out there. And of course there's always a learning curve. There's those that want to do it, and there are those that are lagging behind, and then there's the sort of the big lump in the middle, and what you've got to do is get into that lump and get your arms around it and help bring it forward in a positive way, with a little bit of stick too. And that is largely how the scheme functions. And what I will be doing with the scheme over the next couple of years is tightening up those mechanics so that the standards are higher, and more is being asked because it needs to be. But at the same time, the monitoring develops more into sort of assessment and audit approaches, so that they're stronger for the public, and that we have the public voice in there a bit more too.
Thanks, Amanda. That's really useful. And I want to move on to a slightly different theme now. And I'm going to ask Peter to comment on this one. Peter, in Stuart's presentation, he used the phrase, fragmentation has been incentivised. That's a very strong statement there, but I'm going to ask you to react to it because, you know, from your point of view as representing the product manufacturing community, clearly the contractors, the hollowed out firms of managers managing their supply chains are the ones that your members, Peter, are the ones, they're customers, of course. So if fragmentation, Peter, has been incentivised, what are we looking for the contractors to change in their practices to overturn that?
Jackie, very, very good point. You know, I'm grateful for Stuart for identifying that kind of issue. And you know, without sounding like I'm older than I am, which is obviously about 200, you know, you do reflect on how we used to deal with things going back there were lots of things that were wrong with the 60s and 70s, but one of the things that was really good was that we had joined up thinking right from manufacturers, right through designers, right through contractors. Why was that? It was primarily because we needed to ensure that we delivered. Because there was responsibility. You know, as an architect in those days, I had responsibility every month to sign off on cost, to sign off on quality, to sign off on the fact that we were keeping things on track and delivering what we needed to deliver. Now, as time has gone on, I think we've got obviously a world which is more complicated. We've got lots of demands on everybody, and I think the demands, the pressures to make things ever more cost effective, shall we say, lower budgets, ever faster, have resulted in that fragmentation. We've seen if anything is too simple, then clearly people can be exposed in terms of their motives, dare I say. So we've had elements of making things complicated because people actually can use that as a tool across the industry, but equally, you know, we are addressing more issues as we build things these days. So there are lots of different elements that come together, and clearly that is going to make things more fragmented. So from a product manufacturer's point of view, yeah, there is a huge audience that manufacturers need to address, and that sometimes is quite bewildering, quite difficult. We have seen we formed the product availability group at CLC through the COVID response to ensure that we brought together all elements of the industry, and for the first time, I think we've started to have conversations across the whole spectrum. And people have started to see other people's points of views, other people's issues that they have to deal with. and they are complicated. They are tricky, and they're going to get more complicated when we start to see the new regulatory framework under the safety bill. That's going to cause a lot of demand on people, and also the complexity of Brexit. I don't think we have at all addressed the issue of the new UK mark and the new UK construction products regulations. All of those are trying to are going to deliver more fragmentation if we are not careful. So we have to pull things together, and we have the means to do that. We've seen through the CLC work, the industry can come together. We have also got, as we've mentioned several times, digitalization, and as Stuart's rightly said, you know, BIM can solve everything completely in one go. So why doesn't it? Why hasn't it? It's because actually we haven't addressed all that fragmentation, because it can do it. I'm thoroughly convinced, but we have got to have everybody working together. And sadly, we haven't got that at the moment. And I could go on all day about this. So you've opened up a real can of worms. So I think I should, out of respect to everybody, stop there.
Thanks, Peter. Well, you know, we are going to open up conversations here today that we won't be able to complete, but we will certainly be picking them up in other events, I'm sure, as well. Now, Stuart, I'm just going to come over to you now, and you'll probably be able to see in the chat and the Q&A many people talking about the nature of the construction firm, the contractor. And let's face it, over the years, there have been people talking about the death of the contractor. Where is the contractor? It's a hollowed out firm. Does it exist at all? Is it just a management consultancy? Is it just a supply chain management firm? What is the future for the construction firm? And, you know, I personally have a few issues with the idea of a systems integrator, because I don't think anybody really sets out on a career to be a systems integrator. It's not operable as a concept. Stuart, fast forward 10, 20 years, do contractors still exist, Stuart, or have they gone?
We always need somebody to build and manage the built environment. And so, yes, we will have contractors. You know, the question is, what will the contractors look like? I mean, I took some comfort from the recommendation of the CLC skills report in July last year, 2019. Where one of the recommendations it made was for the incentivization of direct employment. This is something that we really need to take account of. You know, we've got an industry that's structured in response to the events that I talked about, and they're kind of 50 years ago now. We need an industry that's structured for the modern world, and we need a trained, dedicated, skilled workforce in direct employment. And we have to have traction on this issue. And arguably, as we come out of the COVID-19 kind of crisis, this is exactly the right point to start that big push. And so people normally listen to my critique and they say, that's a very nice critique, you know, but can you give me one action that I can take home with me to put into practice that will make things better? And my answer is, okay, go back to your office and think about how you can incentivize direct employment.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Go back to your office and think about how you can incentivize direct employment. And it will come as no surprise to you. I'm going to bounce that straight back to Mark Reynolds. Mark, what do you make of that comment there from Stuart?
I thought that was coming my way. And first of all, John O'Connor and I who actually put that in the report. So let me go back to, and we've spoke about lessons in the past and things like that. At Heathrow, on Terminal 5, they had a strategy as a client for direct employment. Everyone was on direct employment. And they did that because they wanted resilience for delivery. They didn't want any strikes. They wanted everyone on pay scales. And that was a big lesson for me personally. We had to stick to those rules. So we ensured, as the contractor doing I'll pick that we were the contractor on part of it, doing logistics and many of the walls that were established within T5A and B. All of our subcontractors had to have direct employment, and we put that in the procurement contract. So without actually, we couldn't actually do any work without buying it in the right way. Move on 5 years later to London 2012, we did exactly the same. Everyone was on direct employment, and everyone was on the London minimum wage at the time as well, and that was put in the contract. Move on to now, we are working on a government construction playbook led by the Cabinet Office with industry, and we are advocating that all government contracts go for direct employment through the supply chain. Now, this isn't easy, and what it does, and the reality is you won't get 100% direct employment, but you will get far greater levels of direct employment. And just give you some of these things about unintended consequences. Something that's happened within subcontractors being paid their £6,000 to their subcontractor. Subcontractor can draw down because it can get furloughed. They got £6,000 each. Foreign workers took their £6,000 and went home, not for 3 or 4 weeks, gone home for 6, 8 weeks. And I've had plenty of subcontractors phone me up and say, all my subcontract labour have gone home for the summer. And I say, unintended consequences. The government are not going to change that. I suggest you don't bleat about that. What you need to do is employ those people directly when they come back. Now, life is a balance, and what we have to do is shift it from too much subcontract to far greater levels of employment. That means we must have a pipeline of work for them to enable to employ people consistently. We must have the right benefits that they can do that fairly. And clients need to pay for the work. You know, we have to create a mechanism where the payment is equal for everyone. So if someone wants to go out and have a much lower cost base because they're not paying the same levels of benefits, training and investment, then they won't win the work. And it is simply economics. And so it's about leadership from clients. The biggest client in the country is government. If the government took that leadership and then started to impose that on people, then we would get that. And all it is just you put it in the procurement. It's as simple as that. Let's not overcomplicate it. If you don't employ X number of percentages directly, you don't get the job.
Thanks. Thanks, Mark. That's, I mean, that's, for me, that's a very clear pushback. Clients need to pay. Government needs to pay. We can put this in procurement. We can make it happen. Paul, I'm just wondering about your perspectives on this. We've got a few comments coming in around the role of finance in driving behaviours and driving practices. And I know a lot of people, certainly in the research base, but also in industry, are talking about the poor situation in construction in relation to how much money we spend on innovation. So can you link up for us, Paul, the sort of debates on investment in development of projects, but also investment in innovation as well? Is there a different perspective on this in the Netherlands, for example?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned, for instance, this initiative on BTIC, which is trying to take a long-term view. Actually, the key performance indicators was not really about productivity or driving down cost, but actually looking at the environmental emissions and also what they sign up at in the Paris Agreement. And then they kind of work backwards to kind of see, you know, what we need to do to actually change and how can we draw on the knowledge institutions. But I also see some comments around, you know, but at the moment decisions are made on CapEx and we don't think about necessarily the operating costs of the buildings. And I think this ties in also with your question on collaboration earlier on, because now also we are seeing the legitimizing of discourses around circular economy, which is actually trying to take a whole life approach. And I think actually clients should also be thinking about the how much you're going to spend operating these buildings. And then that might drive decisions and also drive partnerships, so that actually you don't just talk about constructing the building. I think in the CLC report, there was also attention paid to the repairs, maintenance sector. And I think that's really important because I think that that's where the innovation is going to happen quite a lot more prominently in the next few years. Certainly in the Netherlands, circularity is a big issue. That's also seen in the logistics example I shared with you earlier.
Thanks, Paul. Clearly, we're not going to get through all of our questions today, but it strikes me that one of the things that I'd like to ask all of the panelists to do before we do close out our session shortly is to really reflect. There's a comment that's come in on the Q&A there around the audiences for our messages, the audiences for our the people or organisations or actors that we need to influence, actually, to make some of the changes that our panellists have outlined. Amanda's talked about putting your arms around people, having those difficult conversations, but I suspect that there are many different audiences and many different ways of influencing them. So what I'd like to do then is go to each of our panellists in turn, and I'd like to ask them, if we're talking about a construction industry that we would like to see, that we believe is purposive, it's ethical, the competencies are there, there's direct employment, as we've heard, that we have effective delivery of construction. Let's think about that, or industry that we want to see. My question then, closing to all of the panellists, is who is the audience or actor that you want to reach to, and what message would you give them to get there? I'm going to come to Amanda, first of all, to ask that, to answer that particular question. Amanda, who should we be influencing and what should we be saying?
It's a triangle for me, I'm afraid. You can't have one audience. I wish I could. My original training was marketing, and it's great if you can have a single audience, but it just doesn't work like that. We have to reach the leadership of the industry. We have to reach the individual who is doing the job on site or who is designing the building. You've got to reach basically you've got to reach the top, you've got to reach the bottom, and you've got to reach the public. And that's very much the focus of CCS and the Building Safety Future Charter going forward.
Thanks, Amanda. Stuart, what's your take on this, please?
I think for me, Jackie, I get a little bit tired about hearing presentations whereby the construction sector is positioned as being populated by dinosaurs who are slow to change. The construction industry isn't perfect. Most of the people I meet, I gain no small degree of inspiration from talking to them. I think the construction sector has been let down by policymakers. What we suffer from now is the unintended consequences of previous policy decisions. Go back to this issue. Government apparently has a presumption in favour of modern methods of construction. Can we have a presumption in favour of direct employment? My audience are policymakers. No pressure on Mark.
Thanks, Stuart. That's great. Well, Peter, I know that you have contact with those policymakers very regularly in your role, but would they be top of your list as well?
With the greatest respect to what Stuart's just said, Jackie, actually no. My audience are the people who live in, use, and are affected by our industry. And I think you've got to start with them because, again, I think they've been badly let down on a number of areas. And if you start with them and then you turn the lens towards the policymakers, towards government, I think I'm sort of morphing my one audience into several. And what I'm saying there is that we have got to have buildings that actually deliver for people. We've got to have homes that are safe, warm, comfortable, low carbon, all that stuff. We've got to have offices that work for people. We've got to have facilities, infrastructure that works for people. It's the job of the industry to deliver that, and everybody should remember that all of their efforts every day go into that single purpose. Now, having said that, we need as an industry to focus towards government to say, come on, regulations are important, a structure is important, support is important, but also dialogue and collaboration is important. And so that's how I'd pull that discussion together. Everybody needs to play a role, and everybody's role is important. And what is our objective? Our objective is a great built environment, and that's to me the key issue.
Thanks, Peter. Suitably holistic sort of answer just there from you, as I would have expected. Thank you. Now, folks who are viewing, participants, you'll notice that some people are starting to put their own reactions into the chat function. So if you've got a view about what audiences we should be reaching and what we should be saying, please pop it in the chat function. Have a look at what others have said. That's really super interesting. Thank you to those who've started that off. Well, you know, Paul, in some respects, a lot of your work, you're a very engaged scholar. I know that you've worked with all sorts of different actors over your career, and you've done some extraordinarily influential and stimulating work that many other academics have built upon. But Paul, who would your audience be?
Yeah, so I've also been very inspired by the people I work with and the research, but maybe my audience is a bit modest. I would say my students, because apart from my research, I'm also an educator. And I think I learn as much, if not more, from my students and their passion for the industry. I think that there is actually a lot of really good ideas. And I guess what's my role as educator is to make sure they don't lose sight of why they wanted to come into the sector in the first place. And a lot of them are also very idealistic. So I want to kind of keep that idealism as well. And they are going to become the policymakers of the future, the clients of the future, the fabricators of the future, the designers of the future. So my students will be my audience.
Thanks, Paul. I like that phrase, the fabricators of the future. That's very good. Thank you for that. Well, Mark, clearly one of your roles within the Construction Leadership Council is to try to reach many different types of actors and audiences. But if I had to press you, Mark, in terms of the, you know, who holds the levers to all this, Mark, who would you want to reach out to?
I've got two points, and Paul's raised one already, and I would call this is about social responsibility. You know, the thing that has dramatically changed over the last few years, and you know, the whole thing around the environmental agenda is coming from society. So society is driving that. Black Lives Matters, society is driving that. It is unacceptable to be corrupt anymore and accept that that's a good thing rather than be upheld. You know, there are, I think societal changes are the things that we need to play on more than anything. And then I point the lens very much at leadership. It's leaders, and I'm not a great lover for legislation. I don't think it needs legislation. I think leaders, and when I say clients at every level, so whether you're procuring a building, be it an architect, consultant, contractor, you can put it in your contract. If you are a contractor, you can put it in your contract to buy that in the right way. You can create the behaviours. And in my career, I was fortunate enough to work on Broadgate, which was fundamental about creating the right way of work, just in time, and an early phase of modern methods of construction. I worked with BAA, who created the right involvement, a brilliant safety culture that led the industry for many years, and Heathrow have continued that on. At London 2012, quite frankly, there was a large group that said, this is how we're going to do things. And we created the right environment to create, you know, a safe environment for 10,000 people to go to work every day. 60,000 people went through that. So for me, societal changes, keep talking about those big things that we need to change, and then drive the leadership, and quite frankly, shame them into admission. Because that's where we're going to change.
Thank you, Mark. And what a note to end on. Shame them into admission. Corruption is unacceptable. And of course, reflecting on all of the societal change and issues that we've seen very much to the fore in the media this year. Folks, it's time to close this session. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for their outstanding contributions. You've kicked off a great conversation for the day, and I'm hoping that we will continue it through on social media, on Twitter. If you have any queries or questions, our email address is up on screen. So please do rejoin us. We will kick off again at 1 p.m. BST, and my colleague Jennifer White will be chairing our next session, When Will Digital Deliver on Its Promise? So the pressure is then on the digital space. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll see you in a little while. Bye-bye for now.